When Theresa May invokes Article 50 and gives notice of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, we will have reached a sombre moment in our shared history. 60 years after Eden's resignation marked the end of empire, 60 years after the Treaty of Rome pointed towards an alternative future, it is almost as if Britain and Europe are back to where we began. But the question now is not whether Britain leaves the EU or whether the government invokes Article 50. The referendum vote last June made the decision to leave. Not to leave is not an option. The question is not whether, but when. Is the UK government in a position to begin such a critical negotiation on our behalf, and how will they be accountable in doing so? After months of denying that the act of leaving the EU was any of Parliament's business, Mrs May finally agreed last week to publish her negotiating objectives in a white paper. That white paper confirmed that the government's approach to Brexit was based not on a rational analysis of costs and benefits, but on ideological preferences alone. Ministers have declared that Britain should leave the world's largest single market with no clear strategy for how to obtain unfettered access to that market as an external trading partner. They now also want to leave the European Customs Union to face the risk of tariff and non-tariff barriers, with no idea of the terms of trade in any future agreement with the EU. And they have laid out no plans in detail for future engagement with the many other European institutions and agreements to which membership of the EU currently gives us access. Certainly.
Willie Rennie.
I thank Lewis Macdonald for giving way. Can the member tell us how his party at Westminster are getting on challenging all that?
Well, I'll certainly come to Westminster in a moment, and I'm sure Mr Rennie will want to reflect on how effective his colleagues there are being too. But after 60 years of Britain growing closer to Europe, we now have a government which is determined to go in the opposite direction. Theresa May would rather hold hands with Donald Trump than work hand in glove with Angela Merkel. That much is clear, but there remain too many unanswered questions, too many ways in which a reckless and irresponsible approach could yet turn a difficult business into a disaster. Our responsibility in the Scottish Parliament is to say whether we believe UK ministers have done enough to go to Europe and negotiate on our behalf. We believe the answer has to be that they have not. Labour this week is indeed promoting a raft of amendments to the Article 50 bill at Westminster. Some have already been voted on, others are up for decision over the next couple of days. They set out what Labour believes are the broad principles which UK ministers should follow in negotiations: maintaining a stable and sustainable economy, preserving peace in Northern Ireland, achieving trading arrangements with the EU free of tariffs and non-tariff barriers without further regulatory burdens, laying a basis for cooperation with Europe in education, science and research, environmental protection and the fight against serious and organised crime and terrorism, maintaining existing social, economic, consumers and workers' rights, and also, as we highlight in our amendment here today, UK ministers should consult with the Scottish Government and other devolved administrations in a serious and meaningful way, and Scottish ministers should work with other administrations to influence the process and the outcomes. The White Paper offers no more than a wish list for achieving any of those wider objectives. It shows little sign of taking on board the views of the other administrations within the UK. And as the Minister did acknowledge today, we in this place have no veto on Article 50, but we do have a right and a duty to speak on behalf of those we seek to represent. We should therefore say that we do not endorse Mrs May's proposals and that she should not proceed until she has demonstrated that she has a clear strategy for achieving the right outcomes from the negotiations that will follow. There are other things that she could do now, even before these negotiations begin. Yesterday, I met parent representatives at St Peter's School in Aberdeen, where many of the pupils come from countries both within and beyond the European Union. I heard directly about the insecurity many of those families feel, uncertainty about the choices they have made to live in this country, and about their children's future. Theresa May could help with that right now. She could follow the advice of the European Committee in its report this week, provide clarity on the position of EU and EEA EFTA citizens living in the UK without further delay. That would make our constituents feel secure again. It would also, in advance of the negotiations, let our European friends and neighbours know that we will not make their citizens suffer because of a decision our citizens have made. She could also do what her party declined to do in the House of Commons last night and commit to seeking a consensus with the devolved administrations on the terms of withdrawal and the framework for our future relationship with the European Union. That would not give a veto to anyone. The constitutional position is clear. But to commit to seek a consensus would show a degree of willing to look beyond the inner circles of the Conservative cabinet, which has so far been sadly lacking. Certainly.
I'm grateful to Mr Macdonald, and I want to follow the point that he's just made. If Mr Macdonald can see the advantages and the benefits of the United Kingdom government coming to some form of agreement with the devolved administrations, why does he think it's beyond the capacity of the Conservative benches in this Parliament to recognise the wisdom and the value of such a step?
Macdonald.
Well, of course, the Conservative benches have to speak for themselves, and no doubt we will hear more from them shortly. But clearly, there is a need for people to recognise the choices that are in front of us. And we will vote today that Article 50 should not be triggered until the UK government strategy is clear, and we will do so in terms of our own amendments. We debated Brexit on the 17th of January, and we agreed that the Scottish Government should continue to seek ways of mitigating its impact within the UK. That remains our position. I have to say, however, it is less clear how far this remains the position of the SNP. On the same day as that debate, the First Minister declared that a second referendum on independence was once again very likely, demanding a common UK position on the one hand, working against the United Kingdom on the other.
Minister.
Can I repeat what I said in my speech, and for the avoidance of doubt? We continue to negotiate constructively and positively, or attempt to, on the basis of this paper, which the Parliament has considered, the options in which the Parliament has considered, and will continue to do so up until the Article 50 triggering, because we feel we can still achieve a deal if there is a will from the UK Government.
I recognise what Mr Russell says, but the truth is that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP government are keeping the threat of an independence referendum on the table. By doing that, they may argue that it gives leverage with Theresa May, but the truth is that it merely adds to the uncertainty we already face. And whether indeed the SNP really want to ask people to vote for Scotland to leave the United Kingdom in order to remain in the European Union has to be a moot point. Some of the strongest votes for Brexit were recorded in places like Banff-and-Buchan, which voted 61 to 39% to leave, an overwhelming majority, as some on the SNP benches might say. So those who voted to leave are hardly going to turn out to vote for independence if it means Scotland will stay in the European Union after all. So I would urge the SNP to recognise that building a consensus cannot be done with the threat of a referendum on the table. If they want a positive response across the board, then they should accept that. We on this side reject an independence referendum, and we will not support anything which creates barriers to trade within the UK. But Theresa May has so far failed to address the uncertainty we face as a result of Brexit, and therefore Article 50 should not be triggered at this time, and on that basis I move the amendment in my name.